So we are on to Chapter 9. Chapter 9 is on emerging adulthood. So I left you with physical benefits for emerging adulthood. That carries over into young adulthood, or early adulthood. So we're going to be talking about that today. We are, again, when we're in our early 20s, we're enjoying our physiological peak. We're having more energy, more endurance. We also have a greater reproductive ability. And so it's a good time. In our 30s, we're going to start seeing that decline in physical aging. And so one of the first things we're going to notice is a change in lung reserve capacity. And so you might feel like you've exerted yourself and be out of breath sooner. We also see that part of this decline is going to be dependent on exercise. And so you do see that if an individual has not been exercising, that can be attributing to aging. Oftentimes in young adulthood, it might be a time where we're getting busier and we're leaving less time for physical exercise. But exercise has a lot of benefits. It can help us with keeping a healthy weight. It can increase our metabolic rate. It can reduce the risk of diseases and illness because we're keeping ourselves healthier and less sedentary. It can lower risks of anxiety and depression with links to endorphins. So endorphins are these brain chemicals that give us physical pleasure and increase well-being. So it is great. When we do, I am going to have you as your Chapter 9 assignment to do a longevity quiz. And so it's just going to ask you some basic questions and guesstimate how long you would live. We're going to be talking about more physical changes throughout the rest of these chapters. So I wanted to give you some tips for living longer. Anytime I've got stuff cut off in the slides because I'm adding the webcam, you could always use the PDF to see everything. So again, of course, some 5 best practices. 1 is getting enough sleep. That's super important. You learned about that Psych 101. You're still learning about that now. Another thing is keeping actively engaged with exercise. Watching how much alcohol you're drinking, and smoking can be a challenge. So not smoking. We talked about in our early 20s kind of having that peak of reproductive abilities, and so we do see that men are more sexually responsive in their late teens and early 20s, and women become more sexually responsive in their late 30s. Some of that can be changes with hormones, some of that is changes with lifestyles and things going on. We do see that many individuals do experience infertility. So we've got about 10 to 15% of those individuals. Some of those infertility problems can be a low sperm count or unhealthy sperm. Females, it can be challenges with ovulation or some sort of pelvic inflammatory disease. Sometimes when we face infertility, individuals can conceive without treatment, so that's about 1/3 of individuals. Half of individuals who receive treatment still don't conceive. And so I'm going to talk very briefly about some of these fertility treatments. One of the most common fertility treatments is drugs, and some of those drugs are to stimulate ovulation. That could be something like Clomid. When you go through IVF, in vitro fertilization, success rates vary between 5 and 30%. Each clinic kind of reports their success rates. You do see that that's within 5% of the cases. When IVF, there's some different types. There's gamete intrafallopian transfer, and then there's zygote intrafallopian transfer. So again, an individual seeking IVF treatment would seek a professional to identify their best courses of action. You do see, again, both of those used. I think the zygote intrafallopian is more common. Some challenges we see with early adulthood is we still can make some bad choices with risk taking, and so we're seeing increases during this time. Again, emerging adulthood, still kind of, I guess, considered aspects of young adulthood. with drug use, and then making choices with choosing violence and having more violent deaths with males. Some of those cases with drug abuse can be connected to intoxication, with DUIs, with fatalities, with acquaintance rape, with sexual transmitted diseases, with homicides, with motor vehicle accidents, as well as suicide. When we think about young adulthood, it is a case of post-formal thinking, and so this is coming from those Piagetian stages. So our last stage we discussed with Piaget was formal operations, and so this idea of post-formal comes post-Piaget, of this idea that we can be more abstract in our thought, we can be more realistic and practical, and we can also be personal and really incorporate our experiences into our situations. And so that's this idea of post-formal thinking. When thinking about what's going on with social roles with early adulthood or young adulthood, you're seeing again independence, identity, emotional stability. Our career might be starting to bloom more during this period. Obviously, there's going to be more intimacy opportunities, and we'll talk more about that. That connects with Erikson's next stage. The sense of community and residence, kind of finding a more permanent residence, kind of less living instability, perhaps going on the road of parenting as well during this stage. And so it is something where when you're in young adulthood, you often have that future focus, like thinking about what's ahead. What am I doing now that's going to pay off for my future? How do my decisions now impact my future with my family, with my career, etc.? There's also decision making that's still connected to what others think, and part of that is getting that advice from others with greater experience or further up the career ladder, etc. And then obviously in early adulthood, you want to be seen as an adult. You're taking on a lot of those adult roles and responsibilities. So Erikson's theory says young adulthood is this idea of intimacy. Again, with each one of Erikson's stages, you have kind of a positive outcome and a negative outcome. So obviously if you left adolescence, emerging adulthood with a sense of identity, he's going to say that's going to help you get to that level of intimacy. Versus in this period, if we don't have significant intimate relationships, Erikson would say we are leaving that stage with isolation. So when we think about intimacy, again, it can be a source of friendship. It's not necessarily just with sexuality. Intimacy can be in terms of close relationships, again, same-sex friendships as well. So this idea of information sharing, debating, problem solving, including, sharing of personal problems and relationship issues, all those kinds of things. When we think about intimacy, we can also think about it in terms of a partner. So cohabitation is when you're living together without being married. We see more patterns of cohabitation, like a tenfold increase within the last 40 years. And part of that is changes in dynamics of kind of how our culture sees this. In general, we see cohabiting doesn't last as long as marriage. You might have heard some findings saying, people who cohabitate are more likely to get a divorce, but that's hard to tease apart because there's different reasons for cohabitating with others. And so we do see why people cohabitate. So it could be that we know we're committed to each other, kind of a premarital, we're going to live together. It could also be, okay, well, we're dating and it's fine, it's convenient, it's economical, we're going to be living together. Some cases, again, it probably kind of is a marriage test, so that trial marriage, testing things out. Well, I like this person, but I don't know about living with them, let's give it a try. So we'll move in together and kind of evaluating the individual. And then sometimes cohabiting can be people are living together and they have no intentions of marrying. And so again, there's these different reasons why, and kind of teasing those apart. when we think about intimacy, we can also think about it in terms of a lot of the research goes with heterosexual relationships. With same-sex couples, we see it's now more common. There's more and more places where marriages are legal with same-sex couples. Those couples have no differences in kind of the stressors and challenges of a relationship, though they could have more stressors, that they're in the minority as far as being a same-sex couple versus heterosexual. When we look at social roles and social relationships within same-sex couples, we do see there's greater equality between partners. There's less of those kind of traditional social roles. One other thing is when they do break up, they might be more likely to maintain that contact because of that closer same-sex community of friends. I have a whole section on mate selection. Again, I mentioned how there's differences. We're seeing older ages compared to the 70s with when we're first married. When we think about marriage and finding your mate, we can think about it in terms of social exchange theory. So what am I getting out of this person? How is this helping me? And then looking at this idea of a fair exchange is that you want in a successful relationship both to have an equal distribution of power or to see the relationship equally. What often happens if there's someone in a relationship that has less interest, it can end up that they have more power because they're kind of caring if the relationship's going to stay or if it's not. Again, you can read more about that in the book. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about styles of love, and so the first one is Sternberg's theory. So it's the triangular theory. Sternberg is also the guy who thought of those different aspects, the triactic theory of intelligence. So he also has this kind of triangular theory of love. So love has three components: intimacy, so emotional commitment component, passion, kind of that arousal, attraction, and commitment to a relationship. And so then he's going to take these three different parts, and then based on those three different parts, are you high intimacy, high passion, high commitment, or where are you on these? He's going to then classify your type of love. So he would say the ultimate relationship is a consummate love where you have high levels of intimacy, high levels of passion, high levels of commitment. So you can kind of think about where your relationship might be right now, where your relationships have been. So you can have relationships where you're so committed to each other, but the intimacy is gone and the passion is gone, and these people are just living together because they feel like they have to live together and they have to still be married, etc. You can also have cases where you have intimacy and you have commitment with your loved one, but the passion's kind of gone, and so that's a case where it's companionate. So again, based on intimacy, passion, and commitment, he's defined these different styles of love. So again, liking is just high intimacy. So each one of those different labeling on the triangle refers to these different types of love. So again, consummate love is that ultimate love. I talked about some other types of love with John Lee. You can read about those in the book. The last one I was going to talk about is frames. I like this one because it kind of relates to how do couples respond with each other. And so if two people in a relationship are very dependent on each other, so if one person changes, the other one falls, they're like so independent on each other, dependent on each other, it's an A frame. So think about the A like the two people leaning in. So that's one style of relationship. Another style of relationship is an H. And so in this one, you have a connection and you're living parallel lives, but you are independent of each other. So if, the relationship, if someone were to leave, the other one is going to be impacted by, that bridge for the H, but it's not going to be as harsh as the A, where they're really dependent on each other, leaving integral lives. And then the last frame of relationship is an M, and an M is interdependence. And so this, you have a really close connection, and so it's you're not so dependent on each other for the A, you're not so independent for the H, but you've got that best of both worlds. And so you kind of stand alone, and so that's the first part of them. But then you're connected and you are intertwined, and that's that lower part of the M. So these letters kind of really help connect what's the meaning with these frames of relationships. So you still have that sense of individuality, the outside of the M, but you're still close and connected, and that's the inside of the M. When we think